This is the Italeri AH-64D Apache Longbow. For some reason this kit has just been sitting in my stash for a few years and I haven't really had the motivation to do it. That is, until now. I decided to stop putting it off, get it off the shelf and just crack on with it. Hello everyone, I'm Matt, this is Model Minutes, and join me on the workbench today as I finally build and review the Italeri Apache in 1/72 scale. For a deeper look inside the contents of this box, check out the dedicated unboxing video I've already made on that topic. In this video I'll be focusing on what this kit is like to build and what it looks like at the end, rounding off with a review. As usual, I'll put a list of the products I used during this build on the screen now to give you an idea of the kind of things to go and get if you fancy having a go at this one for yourself. But without any further ado, let's get into it. As is normal, my first step was to remove the relevant parts from the sprue using my side cutters. Any rough areas of plastic or excess flash can be carefully removed using a sanding stick and a knife. Unfortunately, this kit does feature some imperfections, mould seams and flash in places that does need to be cleaned up. Tamiya extra thin cement will be my glue of choice, and I started assembling the kit with the cockpit area. The cockpit area consists of a number of parts which do have to be assembled. At first glance, the number of parts indicates that this might be a fairly detailed kit, but actually the parts themselves are not particularly detailed. This is a bit of a shame, and no crew figures are provided either. With the cockpit mostly assembled, there is a small clear part, which I have already suitably masked as the edges need to be painted black. A little bit of Humbrol clear fix was carefully used to glue this into place. And it was at this point I realised it probably wouldn't be easy to remove the masks. So I'll paint this separately, and removed it before the glue had cured. Before I get on to any painting, I do want to complete the build of some other assemblies. Here I'm gluing together the rotor blades. These come in a number of parts and it's relatively straightforward to attach them to the relevant components. And now it's time to prime. I've decided I'm going to use this K-Colors black primer as my base colour for the rotors and the internal cockpit areas. A few thin coats of this would be used to build up a good level of opacity. When that was dry, Humbrol number 1, which is a grey primer kind of colour, was carefully used to paint the seats inside the cockpit. I would also use this to dry brush a little of the extra detail that is in here, but again there isn't a great deal, so there's not really that much to see. Humbrol 32, which is a dark grey, was then used to highlight the moulded on seat belts on the chairs. That clear part I mentioned earlier has now been painted and had the masking removed, and this was then glued on using Humbrol Clearfix in the relevant position. And that's pretty much it for the cockpit internals, so I'm just going to glue it straight inside one of the fuselage halves. You do get the option to have the tail rotor freely rotate, and to do this you need to insert a retaining pin from the inside of one of the fuselage halves. Once you've done that, a second piece can be added on the outside, and if you're careful with your glue, the tail rotor should freely rotate when you attach it later on. With that done, I glued the two fuselage halves together. Generally the fit is quite acceptable, but there is a seam where the two parts join together which may need a little bit of attention. I decided to use some Ammo MIG putty surfacer, and this was painted down any of these relevant seams which perhaps have little gaps or generally need a little bit of work doing to them. When that was dry, all of these areas were carefully sanded to try and make them look a little bit neater. Now I'm going to move on to the engine assemblies. These come in a number of parts as well and are simply joined together. Again, the fit is generally okay, but there are going to be some seams. I don't address every single seam on every single part in this kit, as I just didn't really have the capacity for that at the time. These engines can then be mounted onto the sides of the aircraft. Following on from this, the short little wings were added to the side of the model, and then the tail surface was added as well. I added the sensors and optics onto the nose of the aircraft, and actually, in hindsight, I glued the lower one on completely upside down. I didn't actually realise until the end of the build where it was too late. So for this one, perhaps the crew will just have to fly upside down, or everything will just appear inverted on their heads-up displays. On the lower side of the aircraft, there is this floor piece which needs to be included, and you do actually get a second option for a different variant which this kit can replicate. And then into this part I glued the various landing gear legs, wire cutter, and the weapon that is mounted here. This was a little fiddly, and I think technically this is designed to elevate and depress if you're careful with your glue, but I wasn't fussed about that and I just glued it solid. Some weapons are included in the kit as well. There are some missiles. The pylon has these rails glued onto it. The missiles are then joined onto the rails, and then a second set can be added above them. These weapons were then glued onto the inner pylon mounting points. There is an outer pylon as well, and on the outer pylon there are some more rockets. Again, this builds up in a similar fashion, with the rocket pods having the front and rears being glued into place, and then the outer casing added. Once that was done, they could as well be glued onto their relevant pylon position. There is technically another option as well, which goes on the end of the wings. I think they may represent Starstreak missiles, but I couldn't find any British Army helicopters carrying them, so I decided to omit them in this build, and instead just stick for the underwing armaments. Turning my attention to the rotor head, there is the sort of large sensor dome which goes on the top, and also a few other little bits and pieces that have to be joined together. There are a few little extra details which have to be glued onto the aircraft, so I did that at this point, and then I added the large cockpit canopy. Whilst the canopy is moulded to a reasonably nice quality, the framework is not particularly pronounced, and I thought it would be quite difficult to mask this one, so I actually went out and bought a dedicated mask set for this. This is the KV Models example, and it was a relatively straightforward process to peel off the pre-cut masks and attach them in the relevant positions on the clear part. And with that done, I'm going to move on to actually paint this model. I've been out and bought the specific paint colour that I need, and it is Humbrol 155 Olive Drab. This one comes in a rattle can, and it was simply sprayed over the entire aircraft. I did this outside as it was a nice sunny day. When that was dry, I then decided I would clear coat this with a gloss varnish in preparation for the decals. This Humbrol clear gloss was put through my airbrush without any thinner, and a couple of thin coats would be applied to get a nice uniform sheen to the model. And speaking of the decals, you do actually get a choice of 3 different decal schemes in this kit. I decided that I would do the British one and cut out the relevant transfers for this. You might be able to notice that there is a bit of discoloration on my black lines. There is like extra blue ink there as well, which shouldn't be there, but hopefully when this is all applied they won't be particularly noticeable that that is a bit of a misprint. When I had selected the decals, they were soaked in warm water to help release them from the backing paper. And if you'd like your own brushwater mug, check out my merch store. As is normal, microscale set and sol will be my decal setting solutions during this build. Micro set from the blue bottle is brushed onto the model in the relevant places. The decals were then slid off the backing paper and into position, and then later on I'll add some micro sol from the red bottle over the top to further soften them into the plastic. The aim here is to try and make them look as though they're painted on and not just stickers. I didn't find the decal application process to be particularly difficult, and the transfers are printed to a moderate quality. They are not the highest quality that I've experienced, but they are more than acceptable. It is worth noting that on the tail, from images that I could find online, the Army and Roundel decals should actually be swapped in position. So I went off of real life photos rather than the box artwork, and put them in the positions that I could see in those real pictures. With that done and the decals now cured, a further coat of Humbrol clear varnish was applied to the model to help seal them in and protect them. And when that gloss was dry, I decided I would use some of this Vallejo Game Wash, which I did actually thin down with a little water. This black wash was applied to the entire model to help run into any recessed details and also get picked up by those raised panel lines and rivets. It should add a level of contrast and add a little bit of dirt and grime to the model. Once that was done, some gunmetal paint was carefully hand painted onto the engine exhausts, as well as a few other little areas such as the underslung machine gun. Vallejo black would be used to carefully paint the tyres on the wheels. And when that was done and dry, they were then added onto the model. Humbrol 24, which is a trainer yellow, was carefully hand painted onto the tips of the rotors. This just points out to the ground crew where the dangerous spinny bits are. When that was done, I moved on to assembling the small little bits of the rotor which needed to be added, and then glued the main rotor onto its shaft. After this, the tail rotor would follow. There is a small clear part which still needs to be added. I believe it might be like a landing light, and some clear fix was used to glue this into place on the bottom of the aircraft. I did realise that I'd done this a bit premature though, as I do want to apply a matte varnish, and it could get fogged up by using the matte varnish, so I protected this with a little bit of Vallejo liquid mask. And now moving on to the matte varnish, I'm simply using the Humbrol number 49, which is the rattle can acrylic varnish, and a uniform coat of this was applied to the entire model to dull down that gloss coat that was previously applied. The final step was to remove the canopy masks, and with that I'm going to call my build of the Italeri Apache in 1/72 scale complete. And that's another build complete, taken out of the stash and finally ready for displaying on my shelf. So what did I think of this kit? Well, I don't know, there was something about it that was putting me off and preventing me from building it, and now having built the kit, it's okay. It's an okay kit. It's nothing really too exciting to write home about. And it looks like an Apache at the end, but there's just lots of little bits and pieces that don't quite work with this one. When I initially looked at this kit, I was generally quite impressed by the amount of detail that this kit has externally. However, it is let down by ejector pin marks, there is flash in places, those seam lines and also join lines, which you still may be able to notice quite a few of them, and the lack of internal cockpit details are a little bit disappointing. The slight misprint on my decals as well, with the extra blue ink around the black stripes, was a little bit annoying, but not overly noticeable in the final build. I kind of wish I'd applied a black primer or something similar around the cockpit area onto the canopy glass, as I do feel that the olive drab is a little bit translucent. So that's something I'll definitely consider and take away as a point for improvement for next time. I did make my own little mistake on this one, which was to glue the sensor pod in upside down on the nose, which I realised at the end of the build, and by that point it was a bit too late to try and fix without running the risk of ruining the paintwork I've already added. I think on a positive side of things, the external details are quite nice. There is a wealth of rivets and panel lines. Granted, they are of a raised nature, but that's typically how they kind of look on the real Apaches anyway. You do get the option of 3 different paint schemes to choose from in this kit, but they are very similar. So as we saw, the decal sheet isn't particularly large. I am of the impression that there are more recent toolings out there of the Apache from other manufacturers, and if you want something slightly better, those might be a more appropriate choice, but naturally I can't testify as I've not experienced those ones yet. This kit, however, is generally okay. If you're willing to put in a little bit more work than perhaps I did, and address all of those seams and joins that look a little bit untidy. It could also be a good project for adding your own scratch built details if you'd like to do so. Interestingly, the paint scheme that Italeri have chosen for this model kit seems to be kind of generic, and it doesn't actually indicate any specific Apache from any particular time. You might be able to notice that there is no tail number or registration number, so perhaps that would be something to consider getting as an aftermarket, so that it replicates a specific aircraft. I do keep a note of all of my builds in my modelling journal. These are books that I have created and can be purchased on Amazon if you'd like to support the channel. I keep all my notes in here so I don't get anything wrong, and this build took me about 4 days to complete. It wasn't overly complicated, and I made quick progress due to the fact I used rattle cans. I think though this kit is showing its age a little bit though from the points we've already discussed, and the tooling date for this kit dates from 1987. There have been different variants of this out there, and it has been reboxed by a number of different companies since. However, the production of this one seems to be from 2011 onwards, so potentially something that is generally in constant production from Italeri. Of course though, it is not clearly indicated on the box the actual true age of the tooling, which is something I would like to see manufacturers be more transparent about in the future. Retailing for a recommended retail price of €12, if I convert that to GBP, that's just over £10. So for a 1/72nd scale helicopter kit with 91 parts moulded to a moderate quality, that's not too bad. This is a bit like a pocket money kit, where if you want to mess about with it, it's not exactly going to break the bank if you do. But yeah, I think I'm probably going to wrap this one up here. This was a kit that I've had in the stash for a while, and whilst not particularly enthusiastic to complete it, I'm glad that I now have. The build wasn't particularly taxing or too difficult, but there are definitely areas for improvement. Personally though, I'm glad that I finally completed this one and can move on to another project. It was nice to do something a little bit different to the World War II props that I normally build. As always, I'd like to give a quick shout out to my Model Club members for the extra support they give the channel. A massive thanks to these guys on screen, and if you'd like to join them and gain access to other exclusive perks, check out the links in the description. There are other ways to help support the channel as well, and again, full information is below the video. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this, the best way to support the channel for free is by subscribing with notifications turned on so you don't miss any modelling uploads. Finally though, from me, the last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time.